Picture this: a young girl barely out of toddlerhood, leaving the calm, rolling fields of Rutland, England in a blur of confusion and excitement, bound for an Africa she could neither spell nor imagine. Her name is Beryl Clutterbuck, though the world will come to know her as Beryl Markham, and her arrival on the sun-scorched plains of Kenya is the first spark in what will become a spectacular, scandal-laced life that defies every convention of her era. She is destined to train racehorses with an almost mystical skill, soar across the Atlantic in a single-engine plane, bedazzle some of the most powerful men in Europe, including royalty, and stir up enough controversy to fill several lifetimes. But if you think this is a story about a wide-eyed heroine who simply soared above adversity, buckle up. Beryl Markham lived in a kaleidoscope of ambition, heartbreak, and audacity. She was born Beryl Clutterbuck on October 26, 1902, in a seemingly unremarkable English village called Ashwell, in the county of Rutland. Her father, Charles Baldwin Clutterbuck, was a spirited horse trainer, with a taste for risk and a profound attachment to his animals. Her mother, Clara Agnes, came from a relatively comfortable background, but she was not a woman well suited to the extremes of colonial life. From the start, there was little that hinted Beryl would become a fearless adventurer, no star above her crib proclaiming future accolades. Yet it's precisely in that mild rural environment that she learned how easily human lives can be upturned by a change of heart or the lure of a bigger life. Around 1906, when she was just 4 years old, her father decided that the promise of the British colony in East Africa held more excitement and more opportunity than the predictable schedule of English stables. So off they went, father and daughter, to a patch of land near the Great Rift Valley in what was then British East Africa, later Kenya. Beryl's mother could not bear the harshness of Africa, nor could she see herself thriving in a remote farmland that lacked the creature comforts of Europe. She returned to England with Beryl's older brother, leaving young Beryl behind. What sounds like a small footnote was a deep emotional earthquake. It created in Beryl a sense that women, mothers especially, could vanish at the first sign of difficulty, and that if you wanted something done, you had to do it yourself. Childhood for Beryl in Kenya was one long, wild apprenticeship. She learned to speak Swahili, hunted with local Kipsigis and Nandi friends, and tamed horses seemingly as naturally as other kids might learn a nursery rhyme. Instead of learning etiquette in a stuffy English drawing room, she learned how to handle a spear and track game with the same agility and curiosity as the local boys. Her father's presence was central to her sense of security, though she always had a feral, independent streak. She grew up half tomboy, half fearless warrior, seeing every day as a new adventure rather than any chore. Formal schooling was sporadic or non-existent. Beryl's teachers were the land, the horses, and the people around her who understood practical survival far better than any textbook. This hands-on, free-roaming life wasn't typical for a young girl of her background, but then again, nothing about Beryl's life was going to be typical. By the time she turned 17, everything changed. Her father, who had enjoyed some success as a horse trainer, went bankrupt. The farm was sold off and he set off for Peru, leaving Beryl effectively on her own. No money, no sense of paternal protection. For many teenagers, that might have spelled disaster, but for Beryl it was a challenge. She knew horses better than almost anyone. Why not keep training them, build a reputation, and stake her claim on the only skill she had ever cared about? So she did exactly that. While other girls were dreaming of soirees or white dresses, Beryl was elbow-deep in horse feed and saddles, forging a path as one of the very first women in Kenya to train racehorses professionally. The sheer boldness of that move was staggering, especially in an era when women were relegated to more appropriate social roles. It wasn't just courage, it was necessity. She was alone, had no fallback plan, and recognized her best assets were her grit and her gift with animals. Her personal life, by contrast, was chaotic from the start. That same year, 1919, she married a Scottish farmer and former soldier named Jock Purvis. He was easily twice her age and had what we might politely call a drinking problem. On paper, it might have seemed like the ultimate safety net for a teenage girl left in the lurch. But Beryl was not the stay-at-home type, and Jock's alcoholism quickly escalated into an exhausting drain on her. From the outside, the marriage seemed doomed. Soon the Kenyan colonists were whispering about Beryl's extramarital liaisons. She had begun affairs with wealthy men in the so-called Happy Valley set, a group notorious for its scandalous parties, drug use, and love triangles among the British expatriate community. The gossip soared when she parted ways with Jock, cementing a pattern for Beryl: short-lived unions, restless heart, and a preference for lovers who offered excitement and often significant financial resources. Somewhere in this swirl of early adulthood, she befriended none other than Karen Blixen, the Danish baroness turned coffee farmer who wrote under the name Isak Dinesen. At the time, Blixen was running her family's coffee farm in the Ngong Hills outside Nairobi. The two women, each fiercely independent, bonded over their love for the African landscape. But the seeds of future tension were also sown, because soon enough Beryl drifted into an affair with Dennis Finch Hatton, the very man who had become the great love of Karen Blixen's life. That complicated entanglement rattled their friendship. Kenyan high society collectively held its breath. Would the new pilot Beryl Markham outshine Karen Blixen in Dennis's affections, or was this all another fling in a never-ending chain of tabloid-ready escapades? Dennis wasn't just a romantic figure for Beryl. He was also a mentor, a skilled pilot and hunter. He introduced her more deeply to the world of aviation. The biplanes of that era, fragile, precarious contraptions by modern standards, captivated Beryl's heart almost as much as the horses did. She began learning how to fly, eventually becoming a bush pilot who scouted game from the air, radioing coordinates down to big-shot safari operators on the ground. Of course, Dennis's relationship with Karen Blixen lingered in the background, causing friction. But for Beryl, none of that drama overshadowed her new love affair with flight. It was the 1920s, and air travel was the next frontier, a daring, adrenaline-charged vocation that suited her impulsive spirit perfectly. Tragedy, however, found her once more in 1931, when Dennis Finch Hatton crashed his plane near Voi, Kenya. It happened shortly after takeoff, an unceremonious end for a man who had loomed so large in both her life and Blixen's. He'd even invited Beryl to join him on that fateful flight. Rumor says she declined after her flight instructor, Tom Campbell Black, had a premonition of danger. Whether that story is factual or more of the legendary mystique that always clung to Beryl, the effect was the same. Dennis's death hit her hard. His loss was one of the only times Beryl's usually impenetrable armor cracked wide enough for people to see a raw, vulnerable side. It seemed every time she got close to someone, fate had a way of yanking them out of her life. Then came Tom Campbell Black. If Dennis was her introduction to flying, Tom was the driving force behind her deeper mastery of the craft. He was her flight instructor, a brilliant pilot, and inevitably another lover. His role in Beryl's life was pivotal. He helped refine her skills in the cockpit, teaching her to read the whims of the sky and handle unexpected malfunctions. But in 1936, tragedy struck again. Tom died in Liverpool during an air race colliding with another plane on the ground in a bizarre freak accident. Beryl was in England, preparing for a flight that would become her crowning achievement, and the news of Tom's death tore another hole in her fast-paced world. That crowning achievement, of course, was her Atlantic crossing. By 1936, the aviation community was abuzz with daring stunts. Pilots soared across the globe, attempting record-breaking feats, trying to prove that the airplane could knit continents together and shrink the planet. Charles Lindbergh had famously crossed from the U.S. to Europe in 1927. Others sought to replicate or surpass that feat. Beryl had her own plan. She would fly nonstop from England to North America against the prevailing winds, an east to west direction that posed a far trickier route. No one had done that. On September 4th, 1936, she took off in a Percival Vega gull named the Messenger, lifting into the sky near Abingdon, southern England. Alone in the cockpit, carrying minimal supplies, she aimed to land in New York, accomplishing something no pilot had yet done. Her flight was harrowing. After about 20 hours, somewhere in the skies near Nova Scotia, her fuel lines began icing. The plane sputtered and lost power, forcing her into a crash landing at Cape Breton Island rather than continuing on to the Big Apple. Was it a perfect crossing? Hardly. But it was enough to secure her place in history. She became the first person to fly from England to North America nonstop, east to west. Newspapers glowed with praise, calling her an aviation pioneer. She flashed her trademark grin for photographers, standing next to the battered but dignified Vega gull. Though she didn't reach New York, the essential achievement remained. For Beryl Markham, it was a moment of official arrival, not just as a bush pilot from Africa, but as a world-class aviator. Yet behind every burst of success loomed scandal. The name Markham wasn't even her maiden name. It belonged to her second husband, Mansfield Markham, a wealthy Englishman she married in 1927. Mansfield fathered her son Gervase, born in 1929, though rumors swirled that the boy might actually be Prince Henry's child. Yes, Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, son of King George V. It sounds like the plot of a melodrama, but Beryl's affair with the prince was no secret among the British upper crust. Their entanglement caused a wave of panic for the royal family, with King George V hurriedly sending Henry on far-flung royal visits to stifle the rumor mills. According to some accounts, Beryl was installed in the Grosvenor House Hotel, minutes from Buckingham Palace, strolling barefoot through the corridors of the palace when passion overcame discretion. Whether or not the tale is embroidered, the monarchy was not amused. Mansfield eventually filed for divorce, threatening to cite the prince as a co-respondent, an unthinkable threat to the palace's image. The Markham brothers, Mansfield and his brother Charles, seemingly blackmailed the royals into setting up a trust fund that would provide Beryl with a small annuity, ensuring the affair disappeared quietly from the public record. Another pilot figure in her life was Hubert Broad, yet another man Beryl had an affair with in the early 1930s. When Mansfield divorced Beryl in 1937, Broad was named in the proceedings as a co-respondent. It was messy, but by this point, Beryl had become well accustomed to messy breakups and swirling allegations. After her triumphant Atlantic flight in 1936, she returned to see Hubert, leaning on his support during what could have been a huge turning point in her flying career. But as always, Beryl's personal connections were complicated, short-lived, and overshadowed by her ambition. Whether she truly felt guilt or regret is something she tended to hide behind a shield of stoicism. Meanwhile, her relationship with her son Gervase was a casualty of her restless lifestyle. She had little maternal instinct, leaving him mostly in the care of Mansfield's mother or other guardians in England. Over time, that estrangement solidified. Gervais grew up away from his mother, barely knowing her. Though Beryl's heart might have had a corner that ached for him, her pattern was always to keep moving forward, training horses, flying airplanes, mingling with high society, outrunning the constraints of motherhood. Gervais died at age 42 in a car accident in 1971. They had barely seen each other, last meeting in 1955. She never met her granddaughters. During World War II and into the early 1940s, Beryl spent time in the United States. She briefly tied the knot a third time, marrying a writer and journalist named Raoul Schumacher in 1942. He would later claim to have ghost-written or heavily edited Beryl's autobiography, West with the Night, a book that, in its pages, captures the lyricism of Africa's landscapes, the thrill of flight, and the grit of living in a world where a woman had to fight for every inch of autonomy. Published in 1942, the memoir got respectful critical reception, but didn't set the world on fire. Hemingway famously praised her prose in a private letter, calling it bloody wonderful. Still, for decades, the book fell out of print and languished in obscurity. Beryl's life in America was checkered. She tried her hand as a flight instructor, took odd jobs in Hollywood as a technical advisor on a few film projects, and drifted around in a haze of half-formed opportunities. Some days she dazzled, other days she was strapped for cash. Lavish spending and relationships with wealthy benefactors formed a pattern she never quite broke. Eventually, she made her way back to Kenya in 1952, resuming her old passion of training thoroughbreds. She found more success in the stables than in the air at that point. And though she was never again the toast of the London tabloids, she carved out a life that resembled her early years, up before sunrise, scoping out the racetrack, passing on her knowledge to the new generation of jockeys, and finding contentment among animals that never judged her the way people did. Over time, Beryl drifted into a lonely existence. Friends and admirers still recognized her fierce independence, but her heyday was long past. She had outlived most of the flamboyant members of the Happy Valley set. She trained horses until well into her 70s, but money was scarce. By the early 1980s, she was discovered living in near poverty, battered by a burglary at her small home near the Nairobi racetrack. That once unstoppable spirit was dimmed, but then, as if fate wanted to give her one final reprieve, West with the Night was rediscovered. A California restaurateur named George Gutekunst had read Hemingway's old letters praising the memoir and hunted down a copy. He was so taken by Beryl's prose that he championed a re-release in 1983. The book soared to the top of bestseller lists, and suddenly the world remembered Beryl Markham. In 1986, a public television documentary called World Without Walls, Beryl Markham's African memoir aired, shining a renewed spotlight on her life. The public found her as captivating as ever, especially in the context of second-wave feminism. Here was a woman who, decades earlier, had demanded the right to define her own life in a man's world, brazenly took lovers, and soared airplanes across oceans. The older generation might have remembered her as a scandal magnet. The younger generation saw a feminist trailblazer. In early 1986, she tripped over her dog, fracturing her femur. She needed surgery at Nairobi Hospital, and complications set in. On August 3, 1986, she passed away at the age of 83, leaving behind an estate that included her prized racehorses, scattered personal papers, and decades' worth of rumors and anecdotes. Her ashes were scattered near the Ngong racecourse. In the end, the woman who began life in a quiet English village concluded her days in the country that had become her true home, her presence still lingering in the stables, the runways, and the corners of colonial history. Since her death, her short stories have been compiled into collections like The Splendid Outcast. She has been immortalized in various adaptations, novels, and films. Out of Africa, the 1985 cinematic take on Karen Blixen's memoir featured a character named Felicity, modeled after Beryl, a feisty, horse-riding young woman who hints at the real Markham's free-spirited ways without naming her outright. The following year, the documentary on her life brought renewed accolades. Then came biographical mini-series, references in popular culture, and eventually even a crater on the planet Venus named Markham, courtesy of the International Astronomical Union. Paula McLain penned Circling the Sun, a novelization of Beryl's life that reintroduced her to modern readers, capturing not just the facts but the intangible sense of rebellious wonder that always trailed her. Yet Beryl was no saint. She drank, she partied, she hurt people who loved her. She could be shockingly uninterested in the emotional fallout of her actions. Just ask Karen Blixen or her estranged son, Gervais. Her love life read like a who's who of wealthy colonial men, leaving behind the question of how much was genuine affection versus pure opportunism or reckless thirst for adventure. She offended many, refused to apologize for not conforming, and might have bruised hearts without a backward glance. But that refusal to be tamed was also at the root of her success. One might argue that if she had been a meek, subservient young lady, she wouldn't have survived alone in Kenya at 17, become a record-shattering pilot, or written one of the most lauded travel memoirs of the early 20th century. Her repeated scandals often served as acts of rebellion against a colonial society that wanted to confine women to a certain mold. If you think about it, Beryl was never content to be told what to do, whom to marry, how to behave, or how to settle for the standard feminine roles of her time. She hopped in the pilot's seat to chart her own route literally and figuratively. She took up a whip in the stables, commanding respect from men who had never worked under a female trainer before. She carried on love affairs with men who were either married or royally off limits, spurring rumors in the English tabloids that were as bold as anything a modern social media influencer might face. Her audacity was simultaneously her downfall and her genius, a double-edged sword that made her an object of both admiration and resentment. Loss and grief carved her personality in ways few people fully appreciated. Her mother left her behind as a child. Her father left her behind to chase dreams in Peru. She lost Dennis Finch Hatton in a plane crash, Tom Campbell Black in another plane accident, and her closeness with Gervais to emotional neglect. All these events seemed to create an armor around her heart. When someone died or drifted out of her life, she held on to a stoic calm that many mistook for callousness. Perhaps it was a protective mechanism, a survival strategy for a woman who never believed anyone would stick around. So the next time you see a weathered copy of West with a Knight in a bookstore, or stumble across a reference to Beryl Markham in an old documentary, consider that behind the sepia-toned photographs and the cryptic smile lay the restless spirit of a woman who was always chasing the horizon, whether in a plane or on horseback. She was never content with half measures. She wanted everything life could offer, from savage heartbreak to soaring triumph. With Beryl Markham, you get the full range: colonial Africa, British aristocracy, stables at dawn, midnight flights, love affairs hidden behind palace gates, heartbreak in the Kenyan bush, and a final salute as she takes off into the clouded Atlantic skies. It's all there in one extraordinary life story: scandal, tragedy, glory, and the unbreakable drive to keep pushing forward, no matter where the next flight might lead.